Excited to introduce John Porter, who's the CTO and founder, co-founder of DecisionLink. So he's gonna help moderate a panel here with some great people. We've got a Bob Henderson from Equifax, Bob Caravella from HP, Linda Roach from PlanView, Trent Isaacs from Verint, and Eric Schottmeyer from VMware. So we're excited to have them all participate in our panel discussion. So come on up, John.
So I'm going to read everybody's bio as they come up to the actual stage here and take their seats. First up is Linda Roach from PlanView. She's the Vice President of Solution Marketing. And as the Vice President of Solution Marketing, she's partnering with customers to articulate the business challenges and to quantify the value of implementing change at the organization. Linda loves connecting the dots between buyers' needs, market trends, and solution benefits, and positioning unique ways to deliver value at those organizations. So thank you, Linda. Up next, we've got Bob Henderson from Equifax. He's the AVP of Proposal Development for Equifax. In the Workforce Solutions business unit, Bob has been with Equifax for 4 years and currently leads the proposal professionals team. He helps generate compelling proposals and compliant RFX responses in that particular industry, and has over 20 years is sales proposal and bid response development experience, and is a accredited member of the Association of Proposal Management and Professionals. Bob Caravella. So Bob is on the board of advisors of DecisionLink. Bob has an extensive experience with HP, CA. He actually led the value programs at a number of different Fortune 500 companies. He's been able to drive and manage value programs at companies that have $3.5 billion in operating business unit, and has supported over thousands of sellers in those particular opportunities. Trent Isaacs is the RVP of Solution Consulting at Verint Systems. He's got 10 plus years in software sales consulting, focused on the customer engagement optimization market, and focus areas of Verint include customer experience, data analytics, storytelling, and presentation design, and 15 years in operational management and customer service operations and customer experience programs. Got Eric Schottmeyer. He's an account executive, one of the users from the standpoint instead of the manager of the programs. He's a graduate of UVA, go Hoos. Has been at VMware for 6 years. Was actually hired by Gavin Harris when he was at AirWatch. And he covers all the global enterprise customers on the Eastern Seaboard all the way up through Eastern Canada, and works with those companies to drive workforce transformation and driving value selling throughout the business. And then finally, we have an ad. We have David Kirchen, who is the founder of Master Messaging. He's an engineer by education, but took a different path and spent over 20 years and 30 years in sales, and is leading the teams at Bell, South, Career Builder, and Yodel in his history, and now helps organizations really change the message of how they go to market. So we're going to go ahead and kind of ask individual members of the panel. Probably I only have time for one question here, but I'm going to start with you, Eric. So when you engage customers with value selling materials, ROI, business cases, and the like, what's the biggest objection that you typically find? How do you overcome that when the customer pushes back on you?
Yeah, perfect. So Mark, when he was giving his presentation, actually threw this statistic up, and I think it's so important when you're building business cases. 95% of all IT purchases have to have financial justification in terms of an ROI or a business case. So when you know that going into an opportunity, you need to realize that this is happening whether you're in the room or not. So you have to make the conscious decision, A, to start pushing on it early in your opportunity to start building a business case hand in hand with the customer. After that, when you start asking the questions along that you want to get the answers to, when you get feedback around, I don't think we're going to have to build a business case for this, or as long as you're cheaper than the software that you're actually replacing, everything will be fine. Well, there's a couple of things you should know immediately from that. Those are red flags. One would be, I'm talking to the wrong person, I'm not high enough up in the organization. Maybe I don't have a real deal on my hands if I am talking to the right person. Maybe I should qualify out, right? So sometimes as sales folks, we have rose-colored glasses, and it takes us a long time, maybe a year of kind of wasting our time on an opportunity before we walk away. If they're not willing to give you the information for a business case, then maybe you don't have a real opportunity in your hands, or again, you're not talking to the right person. In addition to that, within IT, they all have a representative from different lines of business. So there's always someone from HR or sales or operations who is aligned to that IT person that you're working with. So if they're talking about improving the end user experience or improving net promoter scores, then that's someone from HR is measured on that information. So if I ask questions like, okay, well, that sounds like someone's measured on that from HR, why don't we bring them into the room or talk to them? And you get an objection like, I don't think we're ready for that. Or maybe we're just not quite there. We don't necessarily need to do that. Again, kind of similar red flags. I'm not talking to the right person, not high enough in the organization. I don't have a deal. Maybe I should step back and reevaluate.
So Linda, we'll go to you next. You're rolling out a value program, right? You're leading that charge at PlanView. So as you get more momentum with your value program, what challenges will you experience as you roll it out to the field and try to enable those folks?
Sure. So we started our rollout with a pilot middle of the year, and we rolled out to the sales organization starting in July and August, so that some could affect business cases as part of their Q3 deals, but they'd all be ready in Q4 to use to the extent that that they felt was appropriate for their opportunity. So there's 3 areas that I've found to be, I guess, challenges, not insurmountable, but certainly things to keep in mind. First of all, sales enablement never ends, because there's different groups across different geographies, learning at different paces with different opportunities, and getting into different situations. So you constantly have to keep repeating some of the same tips, because maybe they didn't get it the first time because they weren't faced with that part of the solution or looking at that particular area. So you got to just kind of keep the energy rolling. We also learned that the best thing is to get them sharing stories, get them sharing, well, here, I incorporated the tear sheet as part of my setup for the demonstration, and that just kind of lit the room up and set the stage really well. We kind of moved away from the feature function discussion. So is more that they can share amongst themselves, that's good. But sales enablement will continue, because of challenge number 2, which is in our particular case, we have multiple solutions, and we rolled out the first solution, and now we're adding additional solutions. So that's part of my responsibility. I'm the subject matter expert when it comes to the benefits and actually building and working with the DecisionLink team to build the content into DecisionLink and to the assets. Because I've had a long history as a subject matter expert doing that at PlanView. So just kind of keeping that rolling, and that is not the only thing I do. So just ensuring that there's that constant pace, constant stream, and then also recognize we got to test things out, and then also roll that out. And so the third challenge is that thinking about how to measure value in a continuing kind of way. So our sales cycles are long. We actually now closed our first 2 deals that had a business case from DecisionLink tied to it. But how do we measure value and impact overall? How are we reducing the number of no decisions? How are we shortening the cycle time? And thinking through that. And one of the reasons for doing this was to not stop at the sales, because a lot of times people think of business case and value, they get the funding internally, and then they move on. And then, a year later, after implementing the software, they're scratching their head going, why do we do this in the first place? So, and they go back to the feature function. So ensuring that I'm working with the organization and our head of sales enablement, or I guess broadly enablement, to go into consulting and say, okay, how are you going to incorporate this into the implementation process? How are we going to measure success? How are we then going to incorporate this into a renewal cycle? And also just empowering that champion all along the way internally, so when they get asked what's the value of the solution, they can articulate it in business impact and not just feature functions that they've implemented.
Thank you very much. Trent, you're up next. So you're about 1 year into your DecisionLink implementation, but you've been doing value for a long time. Before you did the DecisionLink rollout, you're actually doing a lot of this in spreadsheets. I'm sure that's what a lot of people here have done when they've had to build business cases. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the experiences and things that you tripped up on and how you've been able to solve some of those problems?
Yeah, absolutely happy to. So I'm sure there's somebody else sitting there right now that's trying to do this stuff on spreadsheets today. Yeah, a couple of times, maybe 2 or 3 of you doing it together. No, so when we were using spreadsheets, we had a couple of problems that were really difficult to overcome. Number one was variability.
If we have a complex solution and we got a complex problem to solve, and I've got 40 different people that might take a stab at writing a business case, the chances of 2 of them doing it the same way were almost 0. So we had a enablement problem of trying to get a credible business case authored and then turn it over to a customer on the back of a spreadsheet. It just didn't show very well. And I think it was really holding us back. And what it led for us is that we ended up as a sort of organization that only did value propositions when asked to do so. So in the middle of the sales cycle, if we got to a point where the size of the deal was big and it was strategic and the customer asked us to do one for them instead of doing one themselves internally, that's when we would engage. And there was a small number of people that actually did that very well. So we had a volume problem. We were training the next generation of sellers and pre-sales people to be very good at talking about the value and the meaning of what we did, just about what it is that we did do. So we needed to change that. So when we started evaluating the tool ecosystem that we had to try to get these things done, we needed to go to something that was more automated, which was how we began our relationship with DecisionLink. So the cure for all those trip-ups on Excel was to have something that was more systematic, a solid set of known business drivers, a solid set of definitions of what that meant, led us to a path where we could, A, train people more effectively. That's really where it started. I think Linda said that well. It never ends. So we were training people to do that well, put value at the center of our message early and often. Now, instead of having 3 people carrying that message forward, we had a small army of people carrying it out there every single day that we were actively engaged with customers. The second thing to solve for us was velocity. So it took us a long time to build a business case. We had to go through iterations of collecting data from a customer, and then someone would have to manually manipulate it and then come up with something that looked decent to get back to them. And now it's collection, iteration, delivery, and that's changed the game for us a lot there. So we're able to do more faster with better solid results.
Thanks, Trent. That's awesome.
Sorry about the hum, guys.
Yeah. Hopefully I don't get the hum as well. So Bob Henderson, we'll go to you next. So you started your value journey a little over 2 years ago. Can you give us some of the lessons learned now that you're a little bit more mature in how you've rolled this out to the field at Equifax and looked across both business units?
You're talking about, oh, sorry.
There's another Bob.
The other
You can tell.
All right, so how many do you want me to give you? If I give you 1, can we get to the bourbon quicker? All right. Yeah. All right, so yeah, we started our journey with DecisionLink about 2 years ago. I was fortunate to, be able to work with Kurt, and John, and Gabe very closely and intimately on the project. I would say we've had a number of lessons learned. It's probably some good, some bad, but what I'll do, I'll focus on just 3, right? So I think the top 3 for us, one being engaging our leadership and continually engaging our leadership to drive adoption, right? So not to talk bad about sales folks, but salespeople tend to have their own methods, their own ways, right? And when we say, okay, we've got this new, brand new shiny tool that's going to help you drive value, I don't really need it, right? So we got a lot of that, but while we engaged our leaders, it came from the top down. Here's this new tool, and you will use it. So it made it a little bit easier, right? So I think that's a lesson learned. I think that's something that anyone who's going on this journey and you're introducing these new tools, having that leadership direction from the very start and continually engaging, right? So like I said, been working with these guys for 2 years. There's highs and then there's some lows. It depends on business, right? On business needs. But re-engaging and making sure that that directive is coming from top down is very important. I think the second one is not so much a lesson learned, it's almost an observation. From working and building out our value assets, it's enabled our account teams and my team, proposal development, to introduce the value, our product value, our benefit value very early in the process. And it's been consistent, right? Again, going back to everyone has their own methods. Equifax still makes money despite not having that focus asset and value assets. But now that we are, it is helping us, and it's helping us get that differentiated and quantitative value to our specific customers faster, right? So it's not these, I shouldn't say pie in the sky, but we've got these kind of high-level product and benefit value statements that our great marketing teams come up with, but it's a kind of a one-shot, one-size-fits-all, right? What we've been able to do with the work with DecisionLink is, more focus on the customer, right? That differentiated, quantitative value prop. We didn't get to that until later in a proposal or later in the RFP stage before, right? And I'm sure everyone's familiar with that. So that's kind of a second key observation or lesson learned. And then the third one, I would say, is from a technical standpoint, just rolling out the value assets or creating the value assets. What we've done at Equifax, we've actually, it's a project that is owned by our strategic pricing team. We have a couple of members with us now, and it's a project, all right? And again, from the top down, leadership from the top down was pushing it. We were building value assets, and with the insights and the types of solutions that we provide, we still have a long way to go, right? So we got 4 business units, we've got a plethora of products to help our customers, and we have a long way to go. And again, leadership, focused, strategic project management, that has helped us over the past 2 years. And I'll be quiet so we can get close to it.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
It's fantastic. David, so with master messaging, you spend a lot of time working with companies that are moving from a particular state of their messaging to where you ultimately hope that they'll get to. I know that varies all over the board, but what are some of the common statements and places where they start that really you're kind of scratching your head and saying, how can I help them move them to the more articulation of value in their conversations with customers?
Yeah, it's interesting because we've worked with probably over 60 different companies ranging from very small startups to large companies like VMWare or Aflac. And I've found very few organizations that really have embraced value selling. So the starting point is getting them from the feature and benefit conversation to moving into more of a conversation that communicates value. And I think one of the reasons why we're not seeing more use of value selling is that it's hard. It takes 2 things. It takes a cultural shift, and it takes the insight and information to build the business case. And when I say cultural shift, it's moving from, again, just being product focused. I remember a conversation I had with one of the VMWare sales reps. So we were going through the training, and I asked him, because he was saying, this is amazing, this is what we need to be doing, this is how we need to talk. And I said, well, so for new hires, how much time do you spend on sales training versus product knowledge? And he goes, it's 2 weeks of product knowledge, and it's 1 day of training around selling. So culturally, the leaders of that organization haven't embraced, hey, we need to move away from just anchoring our sales reps around features and benefits and move them more into being articulate. And so that takes soft skills, and it takes, change inside of the organization. And one of the things that we recognized about 3 years ago, we'd be doing a workshop and we'd be describing this is how you communicate value in a conversation or in different mediums. And the salespeople would just look at us and they go, can you tell us how to do that for our company? Just give us what we need to say. And it shocked me. I was like, well, really? I mean, you don't want to take the time? No, this is hard. Just tell us what to do. And so what we ended up doing is saying, okay, we'll do that. And so we started creating playbooks. And a playbook is a starting point for this is what the conversation should sound like and look like in the way that you're interacting with your prospects and customers. And it gave them a starting point as opposed to just saying, hey, go figure this out on your own. So what we've seen is that there have been progress in the organizations that we've worked with as they embrace these playbooks, but it takes the leadership, again, reinforcing what's being taught, going through certification to ensure that the reps, again, are articulate and they can actually do this. But a lot of the companies that we were working with, even with the playbooks, still don't have the insight and the information to build a strong case. And again, because it's hard. So this community here and what you're hearing, it's not an easy thing to go through, but it's every bit worth the time and effort.
Thank you, David. That's awesome. Bob, the other Bob. So you've run value programs at a few Fortune 500 companies. You've seen kind of the evolution of tools and capabilities and done it every which way from manual to in spreadsheets to using DecisionLink and other things. Out of all of that, in the past, kind of 10 years or so, how have you seen the evolution happen? How are people going to scale and get to a point where everybody can be the tip of the spear when they're talking about value?
I feel like the panel historian here. So the best way to answer that, I think, is to frame it in terms of my observations about kind of cause and effect over the last decade or even more than that. And I think we all can relate to the cause. Basically, massive change on an accelerating basis caused by global competition, major changes in technology, the cloud, mobile computing, et cetera, et cetera. From an effect standpoint, I think this was mentioned by a number of people already, so I'm just echoing and reinforcing what they're saying, but it had an effect on both the buyer side of the equation as well as the seller side of the equation. From a buyer side, what I saw over the years, especially the CIO level, CIOs became much more business-oriented, business-focused over the last decade or so. And today, now these folks they do not want to hear product pitches. They'll tell you that outright. If you can't talk to them about how you're going to help them increase their revenue or protect their revenue or reduce their costs or mitigate risks, you're not going to get very far in those conversations. And on the seller side of things, what I saw is just a tremendous increase in sales executive awareness over the last decade or so. I remember the catalyst at Mercury was a QBR, a quarterly business review that was hosted by one of the co-founders who also headed up all product management for Mercury back in the early 2000s. And what he found was a major question at the QBR, asking all the worldwide VPs, well, how are we going to grow the business into the next decade? What do we need to do? And uniformly, the answer was, we've got to be able to quantify the value of our solutions. And that was really what led me to get involved in building the business value consulting practice at Mercury back in those days. But there were a couple of other factors, I think, that raised the awareness of sales executives over the past decade or so. One was industry analyst research. And I think back to, it might have been around the 2010 timeframe when IDC published one of their reports. And it was striking to learn that 90% of deals required now evidence in a financial form to justify investment. More than that, more stunning than that to me, was that 80% of the customers they interviewed needed the assistance of the supplier, that they had neither the knowledge or the expertise, the frameworks, the methodologies, whatever you want to call it, to be able to credibly justify an investment. That, along with publications like the Challenger Sale, Holdens, negotiating with Backbone, you name it, Medic, Sandler, all the other methodologies, whatever one you've picked, they all emphasize the need for business value selling, which had, if you look at the people, process, technology impact of these factors, from a people side, sales executives now began to talk about transforming their organization from a product selling organization to a business value selling organization. Sales reps interpreted that as, you better start giving me benchmark data, customer case studies, you better give me support to do these business value assessments because I don't even know where to start. You had the marketing people who also were looking for benchmark data and customer success stories. They wanted to have value-oriented ways to engage with customers to begin with, to start generating leads. And then maybe the most amazing phenomenon was the rise of the business value consultant over the last decade. These are the gurus, the ROI gurus that were using all these complicated models to engage with customers, to convince them that they had a credible way of justifying investments. And that led to the third thing, the tools side of this equation. And I remember fondly that one of the things that the head of product management at Mercury did was to go out and interview customers about what they had was a calculator. And he asked these customers, well, what do you think about the calculator? Why aren't you using that to justify investments? And the answer was, these things are overly simplistic. I mean, they may excite interest, but there's no way that I'm going to go to the CFO to try to justify an investment with something this simple, which then led to the building of these very complicated models. That was my job. And I think maybe I overcomplicated the building of the models, but we had to bring on very skilled, experienced business value consulting individuals to use these models. That was number one. Number two, because there were so scarce and few of these individuals, we could only support like 10% of the deals when we got to HP. And those were always the most strategic kinds of deals. We couldn't support territory reps, we couldn't support inside sales, we couldn't certainly support partners with any of these capabilities. And the other big problem was that the models really were focused on kind of the middle of the sales process. So it assumed that you had a deal kind of in process, but by the time we got in, it was usually too late because you really need to begin positioning value up front in the sales cycle. I think Mark mentioned that. I think everyone's mentioned that. We had no ability to build a value hypothesis that would generate interest on the part of a CIO or C-level executives. And we had no ability on the back end to measure value realized. So we were kind of in between, and that's what led to really my interest in what Jim and John have been doing at DecisionLink, taking a look at the entire life cycle of the customer engagement, from the research that's needed by customer reps to understand what the requirements are, to positioning a value proposition, a value position to begin with, collaborating with the customer to build a bulletproof value proposition, and then being able to measure value realized on the other end. And the last thing I would say that, sorry, John, this is it, I promise. The last thing I would say is that if you look at the BBC now, this is personally my opinion going forward, that the business value consultant of today, I think, has a great opportunity in the future to do more than be an ROI geek like I was back 10 or 20 years ago. These individuals now have the opportunity to really manage these programs, which requires engaging your marketing organization, your product management organizations to build the models up front, get the benchmark data, engaging the sales organization as well as the post-implementation customer success measurement. And if you do all those things and serve as a change agent, I think you've got a tremendous opportunity for career growth if you're in the value engineering business.
Thank you very much, Bob. With that, I'm going to thank everybody here on the panel for their time.